Jessica, thank you so much for your time. I know you have a very busy schedule, and I really appreciate this conversation because I wanted to crystallize some of the conversations we had back in Korea, where we met, talking about our job as programmers and also film critics, as women, and as you're from Europe, I'm from Latin America. We both have a huge responsibility that comes with our tasks that sometimes maybe we don't pay enough attention to that, and maybe when we start like being in the spotlight on when someone asks questions about why did you choose these movies, how is this section composed, what were you thinking, you kind of start thinking about our jobs. We do think about it, we do talk about it, but I think it's never enough, One of the things I wanted to ask you is, you as part of Berlinale, this one of the biggest film festivals in the world, what's exactly your job? Are you in charge of some countries? How is the festival organized?
Well, so I'm a member of the selection committee. There are 4 of us on the selection committee, and our sections technically are the main competition, the Berlinale Special Gala section, or Berlinale Special section, and the new Perspectives competition, which is for first features. So those are our 3 sections. Then above us, there are the 2 directors, the joint directors of film programming, who are also involved in the decisions over those 3 sections, but then also panorama, generations, and the other areas of the Berlinale that are beyond our remit. Those areas also have their own selection committees as well. And then on top of all of us is Trisha Tuttle, who is the artistic director of the Berlinale. So basically it means that there's like 7 of us in the rooms making the decision about those 3 sections. And between the 4 of us who are on the selection committee, we are loosely speaking, we cover different territories, but there's only 4 of us and it's a big world. So, I mean, we're very, very much reliant on a huge network of advisors and of delegates, of people who are like either based in those countries or have very specialist knowledge of the cinemas from those regions. And they feed into us all year round, basically. So technically I'm supposedly more, I'm just because I'm interested in Asian cinema and in Asia in general. That's supposedly my territory, but it would be absolutely ludicrous to think that one person can handle Asia with like 60% of the world's population in it. So yeah, so I don't think that would be really practicable that way. And also then in amongst ourselves, the 4 of us, I mean, we're all very, interested in cinema from different parts of the world as well. So I just recently came back from Colombia. I'm very interested in the cinema of Latin America. And so even though it's like not technically under my umbrella, I'm always very interested in we share a lot of the things. So a lot of it is just about that initial phase of trying to get through the massive quantities of submissions that we have, and somehow trying to filter those down. But then as soon as things get even to a remote level of interest from anybody, then they're shared, and then it becomes not so much about I have to fight for my territory, because all of us, as you're saying as well, one of the things that really goes into programming is, of course, making sure that you represent geographical diversity, and diversity of types of filmmaking from all different corners of the world. So all of us are very aware of that. It's not like it's not like I'm always like, oh, this is a great year because we've got like more Asian films than we do have, African films or whatever. That would be crazy. So yeah, it's really, it's sort of a process. I mean, I would love for it to be more streamlined than it is. It's not perfect at all. And there's a lot of kinks that we still need to work out. And I don't know that anybody has worked those out. It is just, just because we have so many submissions and so little time. There's only so many hours in the day that you could be watching movies.
Right. Yeah. And you want to be respectful with the work that involves making a movie. So, take your time and having the proper devices. Sometimes I'm saying, I cannot believe I'm this being this disrespectful in this movie, watching it in my, laptop.
I know, it's terrible, and it's unavoidable.
Yeah,
But then the other thing is, on the other side of it, of course, like we have, I mean, nobody comes into this job and nobody does this job unless they have a very healthy love for cinema. So at some point, you also kind of have to let yourself off the hook as well, and you have to practice a little bit of self-care.
yeah.
There is just this constant thing, certainly when the crunch time comes for us around November, around the end of the year, after submissions have closed, and we just have all of them to get through, and we're getting through to, to closing our program. Around that period, it's just like you literally feel guilty every second of the day that you're not watching something, and that's not a particularly healthy way to be either. So at sometimes it is good just to be like, actually, this is also my life and my time is valuable, and so yeah, to let yourself off the hook a little bit, I think sometimes.
What would you say that, because you're in a Class A film festival and it involves watching a lot of film for the first time, things that we usually have, the movies that participating in this film festival and other film festival, we already have some information about those films. So we have already talked. We have some colleagues in the film festival that said, please don't miss this movie. I think it's perfect for your film festival. But what would you say that is going on in maybe the last 2 years? What are the topics that you can distinguish between, this is going on in this territory, these are the kind of movies that are being made in this territory? What would you say, like the trends or the topics or the cinematic ways also?
I mean, we all, I think sometimes we can actually be overly guilty of trying to find patterns and trying to see trends emerging. And I'm not sure how valuable that is in a lot of places. I mean, I think it's just, and I think there's a lot more, there's a lot more nuance, and there's many more factors than simply where something is coming from. And I think it's actually partly for me anyway, and this is just me personally, the sort of siloed thinking, which is that, a certain national cinema has to have a certain type of look, is actually kind of old-fashioned thinking. And I don't think, and I think it's sometimes, as much as it can sometimes build those national cinemas up, it can actually be a cage that the filmmakers themselves then find themselves very restricted by. So we try not to think about it too much in those terms, I think. However, as everybody knows, the Berlinale is a very political festival. So one of the things that we do look for, and we are looking for films that speak to this moment in some way, and that can be in a whole massive variety of ways. It doesn't have to be directly dealing with political issues, but even a film that is very small and is about a small tender act of care, say between two men or something, in a coming from a culture where homosexuality is vilified. That in itself is a political act, and that's a political film, and so it's regarding. So I think that's mostly whatever trend that we're trying to find is just something that is speaking to the margins, and bringing the margins into the center. So like casting a light on something. So it's a very woolly answer, I know, but it's really, I wouldn't want to say that we're, chasing down films with female protagonists or whatever it is, or any of those things, because I think that's, again, it's too small an idea. And the thing that is such a joy about this job is that we are continually surprised. And I think if we go in too much thinking about that we're going to see themes emerging, then I think we can sometimes close ourselves off, blink ourselves to some of those surprises. So I think more than a particular theme or strand, we have noticed certain trends in, actually, I was just recently talking to another festival director, and he was mentioning how many filmmakers these days seem to be working outside of their native countries. So even we saw that a lot in Cannes.
Mm.
Japanese filmmakers, Romanian filmmakers would have working in France. And that was like very specific. It was a lot of it was them working in France, and obviously it's a French festival. But just in general, I think we're seeing that a little bit more. And I think that's a very interesting and a very good thing. And to my mind, it's partly because of the US and part because of the situation with the US at the moment. And the fact that the US, certainly with regards to the European festivals, the big European festivals, is sort of withdrawing itself. It's kind of exiling itself. And that is having this kind of knock-on effect, which is, on the one hand, can be seen as very negative, but on the other hand, does mean that the rest of the world gets to create its own networks, not necessarily relying on the US anymore. So I think that's a really interesting trend that we're all kind of looking at to see develop a little bit more. And then the other thing that I would always say is that because young filmmakers, because we have this section now, perspectives, which is for first features, I think like a lot of them are young filmmakers. It's for first time feature directors. So they're not necessarily young, but many of them are. And those concerns are generational, I suppose. So there's a trend towards, certainly in those things that, Gen Z and younger millennials who are now making their first features have a very specific political awareness, activist awareness, and they are growing up in a completely different environment to the one that I grew up in. So it's really interesting to see how they are taking on the challenges of cinema and expanding the language of cinema through their own generational experiences.
There you go.
Oh,
Yeah,
is there a delay?
no, I couldn't unmute it.
Okay.
Yes, this is kind of getting bigger, this trend or this situation that, before pandemic, talking about the Oscars and talking about
Mm,
Cannes were like oxymoron, they were like opposite terms. You
mm,
you couldn't think that maybe in the foreign language movie and maybe in soundtrack they were like the most
mm,
interesting sections or competitions in the Oscars, but now it's like they are all the movies. I think that from the 10 movies that were candidate last year, 8 from film festivals in the
mm-hmm.
Oscars. I'm talking about. So this is kind of shocking, right? To see
I mean,
this, because at the same time, when you look at the American movies that were nominated, the
mm-hmm.
quality was so different
Mm.
from film festival nominated movies, right? Do you agree?
Yes. Well, I don't know, because I mean, very famously, Paul Thomas Anderson doesn't tend to debut his films at film festivals. Sometimes at New York Film Festival, but like not at an A festival. He doesn't go to Cannes. And One Battle After Another is a terrific film, and that was also nominated. So I think that I mean, it's strange to me that you're pointing that out, if that's true, if 8 of the 10 were festival premieres, because then it's very odd to me that we are seeing this trend emerge now that studios and even smaller studios are kind of refusing to premiere their films, or not giving their big hot Hollywood films to festivals anymore. Thierry Frémaux talked about that quite a bit, about the underrepresentation of American movies in Cannes this year. And I think it's something that we're seeing across the board. And actually, again, it was actually Carol Och, who is the artistic director of Carlo Vivari Film Festival. He was talking about a couple of examples that he's had where people seem to be applying strategies that used to be for like big, huge releases. They're in the States, I mean, they're applying those strategies even to smaller independent films. So his particular frustration was with a film called Josephine, which we actually played in Berlin. It also played in Sundance. And he was like, for whatever reason, the Carlo Vivari have even acquired the film for Czech Republic distribution, and they're not allowed play it during their festival. So there's this straight, which is a very odd decision, and it just seems to be that there is this. I can feel a kind of a retrenchment in the U.S., in the politics of U.S. film distribution, where they're just getting more and more afraid of doing anything, thinking outside the box a little bit. And this whole, and as a result, they're becoming quite an isolated film industry, which is, it's Hollywood. It's the film industry that we all kind of look to, no matter if we want to or not. So I think things like that are there's certainly trends that I've noticed, and they are going to change the landscape of film festivals a little bit, and maybe ultimately for the better.
Okay, so I didn't know that.
Mm.
But the presence of film festival films, that is also a very old
Yeah.
category, is quite, from last year, I'm a voter in the Golden Globes,
Ah, yes.
and everything is changed, and once you are inside that logic, you can see like the threats of the organization, and it's changing a lot. That
Mm.
itself, that after the grand scandal of the Golden Globe, that they almost disappeared in 2021, and they
Hmm.
decided to open to all around the world. Well, this is the fourth year, I think, that is open to international press that is not in Hollywood. And actually,
Hmm.
this year, half of the people in my country that were voters, because that is something that you applied year after year, 1 year after
Hmm.
another. It's not something that is forever. And they didn't renew the participation.
Really?
Yeah, and we still don't understand why. We still don't
Okay.
understand why. So it's like everything's changing, and the,
Yeah, I
the
mean, and
landscape.
I think from within Hollywood, like there is there was famously as well an attempt. I mean, quite a successful attempt over the last few years to diversify the Academy membership as well. And I think that's one of the reasons that you see so many international productions now, gaining traction in more categories than simply international film. They've also just now changed the international film rules a little bit to allow the top prize winners from the A festivals also to be entered automatically into that category, as well as the ones that the national bodies do. So they are very clearly, on the one hand, I think that there are organizations, and actually the Academy is one of them, that is very clearly trying to understands that the US is no longer this monolithic entity, and it is part of the world, and it needs, if the US movie system is going to survive, it needs to understand that it is part of a global ecosystem. But then at the same time, just what has happened recently, and very recently, and this is under Trump, it is to do with like tendencies towards the far right. It's to do with the rise of AI and all sorts of things, and their own writers' strikes that they've had, and their SAG strike that they had. All of those things have kind of also contributed on the other side then to this sort of being incredibly risk averse. And if they can find a simpler and like more tried and trusted way to do something, like really not wanting to rock the boat in any way. And so I think, it's both of those things are happening at the same time, which is confusing. But yeah, as you say, everything's just a bit of a mess at the moment, and nobody really knows what they're doing.
Exactly. There's no one
No,
to ask.
no,
I mean,
exactly. There are no adults in the
who's in
room.
charge? I cannot ask you. Okay, so you mentioned that you really like Latin American cinema. You
Mm.
visited Colombia recently. Um, what could you say that is going on in Latin American cinema? What
I
what
mean,
can
this
you
is a, yeah.
the same conversation, the Latin American films that go to Class A film festival, what would
Mm.
you say that is going on?
Well, I mean, for a long time, Latin American cinema, I think, on the international stage, outside of that region itself, was very much heavily represented, possibly by Mexican cinema and by Mexican filmmakers. In the last few years, we've really seen like Brazil has had an amazing few years, just internationally, and again, like at the Oscars and all that kind of stuff. But just in general, in Cannes, um, it's been an incredibly high profile national cinema, and it has really, and I think it has done, I really enjoy the Brazilian example, because I think that's one particular one where I would say there isn't a particular thematic kind of similarity between these films. It feels very diverse and very lively, and yet they do feel very authentically Brazilian. And I know how crazy Brazilians themselves get, you know, how the fandom behind their films, which I'm sure is kind of a little bit annoying if you're there, but from the outside, it's sort of it's amazing, and it's just wonderful to see anybody for any reason celebrating cinema. And you know, Brazilians do it in such a voluble and, you know, joyful way. So it was really wonderful. So that's been really lovely to watch. I think that probably, just from what I'm sensing at the moment, I think maybe Brazil will start to take a little bit of a backseat. I mean, because I've just been to Colombia and I'm sort of have been talking to quite a few Colombian filmmakers. It feels like very lively, but there in Colombia, it actually feels like it's a very lively scene, but in the way that they're investing in their younger filmmakers. And so I would be very hopeful of something coming out of that. You know, this is the other thing as well. We're talking about Latin American cinema. It's ridiculous because obviously we're talking about so many different countries here. I mean, you know, Chilean cinema has, you know, has had like possibly like among the highest profile just consistently for the last, like, since I've been writing about film, since I've been involved in film, like every year there's just another emerging fantastic Chilean filmmaker. And we then also, of course, there was Argentina, and there was the big problem that happened with the Argentinian, basically the collapse of the Argentinian film industry all at once, you know, overnight. And that was then taking something that had been a very healthy and very thriving industry and really knocking it out at the knees. So to try and, you know, umbrella term all of those extremely different situations into one thing of Latin American cinema is kind of difficult. But it does always feel to me, it feels to me like a very lively area. And I think even just because of its geographical proximity to the US, I'm falling into the same trap that I always wish people wouldn't. And I'm sort of referring everything back to the US. But because the US isn't there, and there is still that geographical closeness, that there's something about, I think this might be the time for Latin American cinema. It's almost might be, you know, primed to fill in that the kind of the vacuum that is left by us not having those big high profile things, because so many of those countries and there's so many of those directors from those countries are quite well established on the international scene. I think that it will be an easier, you know, it's an easier sell. If you, even right now, I know for us, like it would be a much easier sell for us to say that we have a Latin American title than, for example, a film from Indonesia or from some other, you know, emerging market, because it feels established and because people in their minds kind of feel that they know what a Latin American cinema is, and it's a very developed and very sophisticated cinema. So yeah, I mean, I think I can't make any predictions, but I think I think it might be a good time to be a Latin American filmmaker.
Yeah. Yeah, and at the same time, we as film festivals, you know, in Latin America, we need to build our networks and make them stronger because we cannot live without films, and they need us also. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a really dynamic and vivid industry to be a part of.
Yes.
And to finish this amazing conversation, I would be talking with you for hours and hours. You know, when we think about cinematographies that are not part of our common sense, but maybe we know about, you know, this Latin American cinema, this European cinema. In Asia, we know that also Asia, huge, a lot of countries, a lot of different cinematographies. India itself has like 128 different languages and areas and cultures. It's really hard for me to try to not or to deconstruct these expectations that you get to Japanese cinema, Korean cinema. What's the
Yeah.
difference between Japanese, Chinese, and Korean cinema? Well, Japanese is more, you know, like serious, and Koreans are crazy, and Chinese is like exotic, right? Yeah. what would you say that is going on right now with those expectations? Because, for example, we met in Busan Film Festival, and we know
Mm,
that for the last 20 years, maybe 18, Korean cinema was like the biggest industry that
mhm,
overnight grew, and they made these beautiful movies that you can be commercial and at the same time with author kind
mm.
of characteristics. Now the industry has it's a little bit exhausted,
Yeah.
I think. But what would you point out as these like Latin American films that you mentioned, Brazil, because you were in Asia a lot these last months
Mm.
after Busan. What would you say that is to pay attention to? What would you say?
It's a tricky one because I think that Koreans are feeling it now at this stage. As you say, there is a sort of a sense of exhaustion, and there's also like a certain kind of desultory nature that hangs over some of the Korean genre films. You know, everybody is looking for the next Korean genre film, and it's a sort of any festival that programs a midnight selection. It would almost be, you know, a major faux pas to not have you know, some sort of slick Korean thriller in there. You know, they even had they had the zombie movie Colony in Cannes. They did one a couple of years last year or the year before called Project Silence, which was about like crazy dogs on a bridge, robots, mutant dogs or something on a bridge. So it's just this thing like even snooty Can you know, really recognizes that we have to have this. This is part of what the people are expecting from the cinematic landscape. And I think that that has led to a certain degree of fatigue with it. And actually, I think what's interesting now is when you see, in fact, even that you're talking from a Latin American perspective, but looking at Asia as well. This is one of the things that I find very interesting, and that was really productive part of my time in Colombia. I was in Medellin, and I was on the jury of this nomadic festival called Alternativa. Um, And a lot of what Alternativa's mission is, anyway, is to create networks and create links between films from the global south, essentially, between territories from the global south. So it was this sense of like that there can be a one-to-one connection between Latin America and Asian cinema, and it doesn't have to go via Hollywood cinema at all. So I think that those things are really interesting, and it's a really interesting time to talk about those. However, I do think in the case of Korea, we are, as you say, it's running out of steam. And I think Korea is sort of almost itself waiting for the next thing. Like it's waiting for how can it reinvent itself again. And it is in that difficult period where I think it's quite difficult for Korean filmmakers who are not part of that genre wave, who are not part of the Hollywood wave, to find to establish their identity outside of it, because you basically have, you know, you have Bong Joon-ho and Park Chan-wook, and then you have Hong Sang-soo at the other end of things. And in between that, which is where most filmmakers would lie, somewhere in between those two extremes, there are very little opportunities for something to brand itself as a Korean film, because that's just not what the world expects. So, but in answer to your actual question about what should we be looking out for, or what is the more exciting thing, I mean, at the moment, I think Japanese cinema is sort of coming back again, because Japanese cinema, I think in tandem with the blossoming of Korean cinema, Japanese cinema sort of retreated a little bit from the international gaze. But now, of course, when you have like the Hamaguchis of the world making such a big splash internationally, I think people are sort of looking back again at Japan. And I think that there is something very lovely in there's quite a few films that I've seen recently that are actually sort of crossovers, or that like Japanese directors will cast Korean actors, and they have those two countries, those two nations have such an interestingly thorny relationship historically, that when they start to start to explore the tensions that remain and the friendships that can emerge from that, there's something very beautiful that can happen. And that I've seen that emerge as a sort of a through line in quite a lot of Japanese or Korean films, where they are acknowledging this historical tension between those two nations. So I think a sort of a hybridization actually between those two things. And if we wanted to be very, very like just hugely generalizing, we talk about Koreans being very good at genre and at action set pieces and that kind of thing, and Japanese people like almost like Murakami style being very good at quiet and small and beautifully observed humanist moments, all the way back to Ozu or whatever. So when you see those two traditions in those two different cinemas coming together and knitting together, I think there's something very interesting that can result from that. And I mean, you'll notice I am talking about Japan and Korea, and I'm like just not talking about the big guy there, which is China. And China is a whole law unto itself. I am half Chinese, so I can say this without without too much fear of repercussion. But it is really, China is as I'm sure you know, any of us who work in the film industry, who work in film festivals, who are interested in trying to bring Chinese films, it is just it's an entire other category of thing. As soon as you decide that you want to program a Chinese film, it's so difficult. They make it so very difficult, and it's so very difficult then for the filmmakers themselves as well. And there's such an incredible wealth of talent in China. I mean, it's just there's so many people. Some of them have got to be filmmakers, and some of them have got to be really good filmmakers. And it's very difficult for us to be able to play those on an international stage. So at the moment, I think China is almost doing its own thing, and it is so massive that it can afford to not participate in on the global stage, which I think is a real shame, obviously, and it's a real shame for many of those filmmakers who obviously want their films to be seen and to, and also just because so many of them present such an interesting side of China that you won't have seen otherwise. And if that story doesn't get out there, all we keep on being met with are the sort of are the more negative portrayals actually of China. So I think that China, yeah, it's really difficult to know what to even predict from China. Every time I'm there, I'm simultaneously struck by how passionate and how amazing and how talented so many of their young and emerging filmmakers are. And then also by the fact on the business side, all they really want to talk about is Ne 2, which was this huge the animated sequel that was like the biggest movie of last year, that made however many billion. So there's this the absolute clash between the commercial and the artistic sensibilities is really pronounced in China, and it can be very. I think there's a lot of things that become a casualty of that clash, and then added to that, of course, because you have the very, very heavy hand of Chinese state censorship, that can go on even after a film has premiered internationally, even after it has won awards internationally. There's a lot of stories recently of films that have done Chinese films that have been very successful on the international festival scene, and then have not managed to get releases in China themselves because they're tied up in another level of bureaucratic red tape. So yeah, China is kind of almost removing itself from the equation at the moment as far as international exposure is concerned. We really have to go in there and hunt things down, and we really have to pursue them if we want them. And of course I do. So it takes a lot of energy on our part, but we will always try to do that. But it does mean it's very difficult for me to predict what trends or
Right.
anything that's emerging from China. So I would say,
Right.
yeah, keep an eye on Japan and Korea, but especially on collaborations or on films that are sort of hybridizing those big traditions.
Yeah, I was thinking that one of the different shades that appear in Korean cinema were the first movies made by young filmmakers, women filmmakers,
Mm,
and I got the chance to talk with some of them, and they said that the first movie was okay, but to make a second movie, they
make a
couldn't
second
find
movie.
any money
Yeah.
to make them. So I think that's a huge topic in Korea too, because it was, like there were like 3 or 4 movies that were amazing, also genre movies or very
Mm,
independent movies, and that's it. And when you
mm,
try to research what are these directors doing, they're like producing
Yeah.
men, male directors, or trying to find their way in the industry, but they hadn't managed to make a second movie. Different from China, that one of the most interesting things that I got to see were movies made by young women.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them that started in Europe, maybe France, and they made like these video artistic documentaries about the women in their family. Amazing,
Mm-hmm.
super independent and refreshing, and also that like glance into a woman's life in contemporary China, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm. I do
Yeah.
think though, like even in China as well, I think it is a problem Asia-wide. And I mean, I don't think people will be so surprised about this with regards to China, but certainly with regards to Japan and Korea. I mean, I love those. I love visiting those countries. For one thing, I just love the food, and especially in Korea. It's my favorite cuisine. And but you know, and Korea is in so many ways just so ridiculously advanced. We were in Busan, like the Busan Film Center is just one of these facilities which feels like it's from the future. So, you know, in so many ways, it's so forward thinking, and yet I think in its gender politics, it's the social hierarchy, it's incredibly regressive. I mean, I found that in Japan as well. You know, Tokyo for so long has been held up as this, you know, absolute bastion of modernity. And then you go there and there's just these incredibly prescribed gender roles. And a lot of the time it is young women who are like doing the work on the ground, but it is older men who are the CEOs and who are the ones who are their bosses all the time. And there's a sort of an acceptance of that's just the way it is, even in these apparently very progressive societies. So that's absolutely true, I think, for both of those countries. And then within China as well, it's actually funny you were saying this because I was at the Beijing Film Festival last year, and there was a talk given by by a female Chinese film director of like she was probably the equivalent of the fifth generation, so sort of Zhang Yimou vintage or whatever, and she was just talking actually in obviously in her day as well, just about how incredibly hard it was. And I was then thinking about when we think about the great Chinese directors, when we think about fifth generation directors, there are no women in there. There's not one single woman in there. And even, you know, in Korea, which has made some inroads, as you say, there's like some of these young female filmmakers are getting to make their first films. But really, again, when you list off the names of the famous Korean film directors who have emerged recently and the ones who will get the budgets in future, which is the key issue. So
Yeah.
they are all men. So, and again, in China, she was also saying this director was saying that, you know, she managed to sort of eke out a career, but in between she never got a single budget that was even remotely comparable to those of her male colleagues. And so she actually did do a lot of documentaries because documentary was one way that, you know, you can sort of control
Yeah.
the production budget yourself, and you can keep those costs very modest. So that's actually one of the reasons that I think we're seeing a really great upswelling of really interesting and really dedicated young female documentary directors. But in the feature sphere, in the fiction sphere, I think it's much harder.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Mm.
very it's hard to watch when you have some clarity. Saying these young directors, they were like 3 or 4 years that a Korean, you know, independent filmmaker would appear, and then no more movies, and then
Mm.
they're all the same people having the same conversations and wondering why they have run out of ideas.
Mm.
You
Mm.
say,
Yeah,
well,
and
maybe,
maybe it's a systemic problem and not so much the
yeah.
problem with them. I mean, but this was also for quite a while. This was one of the things that people were discussing, even in the States, when people were trying to, you know, when there were efforts made to try to diversify the directing pool, basically, that it was it actually became relatively easy. I'm never going to say it's easy, but relatively easy for women, young women, like emerging from film schools or just picking up a camera for the first time, whatever, to make their first film. But very,
Right.
very many of those have never made their second.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's still an issue, I think, all over the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about Im Sung Rie. That's the Korean director that she made Little Forest. And
Right.
when you look at her filmography, it's the same as Hanliu, like
Yeah.
Park Chan-wook, Bong Joon-ho, and we never mention her
Yes.
as part
Yeah.
of that trend, you know?
Yeah.
Kim Ki-dok, like Hong Sang-soo,
Yes.
like all of this group, and she's at the same time making movies.
Yeah. Yeah.
But one of
Yeah.
the director told me that she wanted to make some. She made where the truth, beneath the truth, something like that, and it was
Okay.
produced by Park Chan-wook, and actually she
Okay.
would be the second assistant director of Park Chan-wook, and she
Uh-huh.
told me that she wanted to make a second movie, and then they would say, what would you talk about, murders and horrible things in the world? What would you say, like, being a woman in this world means to you? Or like romantic comedy or,
Okay, yes. Yeah, yeah.
well,
I mean, that's the other
anyway,
thing. We talk about things on a very cinephile level as well, and things that might come to festivals. But of course, Korea, especially, I mean, I know because I see so many of these films that they weirdly submit, even though they have no chance. But like Korea has its own domestic cinema, which seems to be doing very well from the number of films that they make. But a lot of those are just incredibly ordinary looking to me, romantic comedies and
yeah.
yeah, lots of things about my girlfriend is a ghost or I am dating a ghost for some reason. There was a whole like series of my girlfriend is a ghost kind of movies. Um, and so
Stop
yeah,
killing
obviously.
women, maybe.
Yeah.
Come on. Why a ghost?
I mean, but it's the same everywhere. We always have that with, obviously we talk such great guns about French cinema now that we've just come back from Cannes and everything, but also, France has its terrible tradition of like horrible mainstream French comedies that pack out the multiplexes in a way that even the
Yeah.
greatest French movie probably won't. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for your valuable vision and your
You're very
generosity with
welcome.
your
It was
time.
a very nice chat. I hope I didn't say anything. I hope I said something interesting. I think I feel
You
like I was
did.
just
Yeah,
chatting
because
away.
we naturalize all the things we get to see and understand. You have been in the business longer than I have, so and you are in a Class A film festival, so you have like the big picture, and you go through different continents, and you have like very specific and wide vision. So that's very valuable for us. Thank you so much.
So bad.
I hope
Well,
to
thank
see
you
you
very much.
soon.
Yes, I hope I'll see you soon at somewhere exotic soon.
Yes. Let's meet somewhere exotic. Now that we have been in a Class A film festival, because Ulsan now has
Exactly.
film festival. Okay.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you
You're so
so
welcome,
much.
Sophia. Yes, take
Have a
care and
good
good luck at
day.
the festival.